Welcome to our Bible study Sunday school time here at Southwest Park Baptist Church. This is for August the 2nd. As we move into August, we're continuing our study in Proverbs. This week's lesson is entitled Staying Sober. God expects believers to be good stewards of the bodies that He has given them. The larger scripture lesson this week covers Proverbs 22:17 through 24:22, and that forms the fourth section of the book of Proverbs. And in this section, in this fourth section, there are 30 pearls of wisdom, 30 proverbs in this section. And in the introduction to this part of the book, Solomon underscores the need to pay close attention to the wisdom in each of these 30 proverbs. So let's take a quick look at that introduction in verses 17 through 21 of chapter 22. He says, "Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise. Apply your mind to my knowledge. For it will be pleasant if you keep them within you, that they may be ready on your lips, so that your trust may be in the Lord. I have taught you today, even you. Have I not written to you excellent things of counsels and knowledge, to make you know the certainty of the words of truth, that you may correctly answer him who sent you?" So in this introduction to these sayings of the wise, Solomon says, incline your ear and hear the words of the wise and apply your mind. It's reminiscent of what we saw in chapter 2, when again he used that illustration, or that metaphor of inclining your ears and applying your mind. And then he went ahead to say, cry out for discernment and seek wisdom like you would seek a hidden treasure. Moving on to verse 22 in chapter 22 through verse 11 in chapter 23, there are 10 proverbs that pertain to God's wisdom about wealth and power. In chapter 23, verses 12 through 28, we find 7 proverbs that deal with the instruction that parents give to children. And we're going to look at a couple of those starting in verse 17. The final 13 proverbs, which are contained in Proverbs 23:29 through 24:22, are not arranged around any central theme, but they offer godly wisdom on a wide assortment of issues. But the issue of alcohol abuse gets serious consideration, and that's really the central focus of our lesson today. But the first part of our lesson looks at some instructions from parents to children. So let's look at verses 17 and 18 in chapter 23. Verse 17 says, "Do not let your heart envy sinners, but live in the fear of the Lord always. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off." When we as parents and grandparents consider the decisions in life that our children and grandchildren have faced and will face, it can be kind of overwhelming. And it can fill us with a sense of fear and dread, because we realize there's a sinful world out there that works very hard to be appealing and alluring. If you look back at verses 15 and 16, Solomon has given voice there to his hope and prayer for his children. Verse 15, he says, "My son, if your heart is wise, my own heart also will be glad, and my inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak what is right." And as a parent and a grandparent, I can tell you that there's not anything in the world that gladdens your heart, makes you rejoice more than when you see your children and your grandchildren make good decisions and wise decisions. And that's the thrust of what Solomon says here. He follows that up there in verse 17 with this strong admonition, don't let your heart or mind envy sinners. One of the responsibilities that we have as parents and grandparents and as a larger church family, community of believers, is to teach and warn our young people of the dangers of sin, the false promises that go with it. And when we do that, and as we do that, we enable them to recognize the danger signs and not allow themselves to be taken in. And as Solomon says here, envy the sinner. Solomon was aware of the potential temptation of a sinful lifestyle. And so he reminded his children here of the promise associated with living in the fear of the Lord. Entrusting one's life to the Lord and following Him results in a promising future. Verse 18, surely there is a future, literally a latter end, and your hope will not be cut off. The Holman Christian says, for then you will have a future. So instead of drifting away from the Lord and into a lifestyle dominated by sin and foolishness, one is better served by putting their hope in the Lord. And as we've seen before, this hope is not just wishful thinking, but rather it's an extreme confidence. When we live lives that reverence the Lord, we can have a confident expectation of a future. And the ultimate aspect of that future is eternal life in heaven. So, do not let your heart envy sinners, but live in the reverence or live in the fear of the Lord. In verse 19 through 21, he goes on with some more instruction to his children. Verse 19, listen, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Do not be with heavy drinkers of wine or with gluttonous eaters of meat. For the heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe one with rags. Verse 19, we need to pay careful attention there to the challenge to listen. Listening's a choice, and it involves us choosing to seriously evaluate our actions in terms of the long-term effects. Sometimes we're prone to act on impulse and just completely ignore the godly wisdom that's offered to us. So the very first step that Solomon challenges his children with here is to listen. The second, he admonishes his children to be wise. Wisdom involves developing the skills that are necessary to live a life that pleases God. As we listen and we open our minds to God's direction, we're wise when we choose to follow Him. The next step is to direct your heart in the way, or keep your mind on the right course. Another translation says, staying on course shows our devotion to the Lord and that we are serious about following His direction for our lives. This kind of devotion mandates that we not allow competing influences to take over the reins of our minds. Don't envy the sinner. If we look back in chapter 4, verses 25 through 27, Solomon said there, look straight ahead. Fix your eyes on what lies before you. Mark out a straight path for your feet. Stay on the safe path. Don't get sidetracked. Keep your feet from following evil. The wise person will have an unswerving directness, but the fool is easily distracted. And we've seen this imagery before of the level, firm, straight path that we're advised to find and follow. Warren Wiersbe reminds us that outlook determines outcome. Everybody has some vision before them that helps to determine their values, their actions, and their plans. As he says, we would all be wise to imitate David, who said, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes, Psalms 101:3. The writer of Psalms 119 who prayed, turn my eyes away from worthless things. Life is too short and too precious to be wasted on the temporary and the trivial. If we're walking in the way of wisdom, Warren Wiersbe says God promises to protect our path, direct our path, and perfect our path. Verse 20, Solomon directs our attention to two of those competing influences that want to take control of our minds. The first of these is the temptation to indulge in heavy drinking. Do not be with heavy drinkers of wine, he says. Solomon knew that many people would give themselves over to drunkenness. They would keep on drinking until they drank far too much. The second temptation that he mentions here is gluttony. The picture here is of out-of-control eating. They would stuff themselves repeatedly on whatever they could find to eat. Unable to stop, they would gorge themselves on food. Both the drunkard and the glutton lack self-control, and this fact plagues them. The Hebrew culture of Solomon's day gave a prominent place to eating and drinking, but really had little tolerance for drunkenness and gluttony. In verse 21, Solomon warned that the future of both the drunkard and the glutton looks grim. For the heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty. Drowsiness will clothe one with rags. Those who associate with drunkards and gluttons will become poor. These two represent the epitome of a lack of discipline. Excessive eating and drinking often are symptoms of deeper problems, and today in our society we focus more on drinking because it's such a dangerous social problem with far-reaching consequences, but gluttony has serious consequences as well. The drowsiness or grogginess referenced in the second line, drowsiness will clothe one with rags, he says. It refers to that demeanor, that stupor, the drowsiness that comes and makes one unproductive and sluggish when trying to work. It often leads to laziness, and the result is that the drunkard and the glutton pay a high price for the foolish loss of control over their body. The Quest Study Bible poses the question, well, just what's wrong with eating too much? Their answer, in Western culture, overeating is usually regarded as a health issue, but our concerns about appearance and health are rarely mentioned in the Bible. Rather, the Bible tells us to honor God with our bodies. Our passage here, verses 20 and 21, says that joining people who eat and drink too much is dangerous because that lifestyle is self-indulgent and destructive. One of the main themes of Proverbs is that wise people should exercise self-control, self-discipline in order to revere God. The drunkards and gluttons have thrown off all restraint, and in so doing have wasted their resources and bankrupted their lives. The same can be said of people who indulge in behaviors such as gambling, partying, using drugs, engaging in excessive entertainment, or sexual promiscuity. While such activities pose obvious health consequences, Proverbs emphasizes that these habits waste time, energy, money, and eventually drive people to poverty. So there's a serious warning there. Our focal passage jumps now from verse 21 down to verse 29, and verses 29 through 35 in chapter 23 have probably the most graphic description of the effects of alcohol abuse in all of Scripture. And so that's what we're going to look at here. The first part of that, verses 29 through 32, gives us a portrait of the alcohol abuser. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine. Those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it's red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Solomon here continues to warn of the dangers of drunkenness, and he uses 6 questions here in verse 29 to emphasize the problematic behavior of those who are addicted to alcohol. Now, although this verse deals specifically and directly with addiction to alcohol, it can be as easily applied to any substance to which a person can become addicted. And in our world, we're all too familiar with the devastating effects of addiction to various drugs. The 6 questions that Solomon poses here in verse 29 help us to see the toll that drunkenness takes on different areas of life. When Solomon asks who has woe and who has sorrow, it reminds us of the damage that addiction does to our emotional well-being. The person who's controlled by an addiction has many woe is me moments in their life. The morning after brings regrets and recriminations and feelings of failure and worthlessness. The effects of addiction also lead to much sorrow as they grieve the losses that inevitably accompany the addiction. When Solomon asks who has contentions or conflicts and complaining or quarrels, it emphasizes the problems it causes in relationships. Conflicts and contention with loved ones is a way of life for the one who's addicted. The loss of self-control also often causes the intoxicated person to become belligerent and quarrelsome with anyone around them. Warren Wiersbe says, alcohol mocks people by giving them a false sense of happiness and strength. And this is what often leads to fights. The weakling thinks he's Superman, so he challenges anybody who gets in his way. The grade school dropout thinks he's the wisest person in town and argues with anyone who disagrees with him. He says, as I was writing this chapter, I read an item in the newspaper that illustrates my point. According to the Associated Press, a British charter plane had to make an emergency landing in Munich because a drunken passenger slugged his girlfriend and started brawling with other passengers. German police had to handcuff the man and drag him off the plane. After sobering up in an airport security cell, the man discovered that the airport had charged him $3,000 for the emergency landing and extra jet fuel. Those were expensive drinks. Solomon also asks who has wounds without cause and redness of the eye. This is a stark reminder of the physical effects of alcohol abuse. Here's an excerpt from an addict's diary. Sunday, October 14. I'm living on borrowed time. I really don't know how long I'll make it. I can feel my heartbeat. I wonder how long my body can take this abuse. I'm sitting at a phone booth right now, not really sure who or why to call. I know exactly what they're going to tell me. This is so hard, it's worse than hard. When you know this is killing you and you keep on doing it. It's pure hell. What is so bad is that I try to think of all the people that love me and care for me. And believe me, I realize it's a lot of people. But I just can't quit right now. With his own words, the addict confirms the truth of Solomon's warning in this verse. We can sense the sorrow and regret, the troubled relationships, and the physical damage conveyed by the author's diary. Thankfully, the person that wrote this overcame his addiction and is now living for the Lord. But for many others, the outcome is tragic and heartbreaking. Solomon answers that series of 6 questions in verse 30. Those who linger long over wine, those who go to taste mixed wine or search out mixed wine. For the addict, the craving for alcohol reigns supreme. This craving causes them to linger long in the company of liquor. The craving doesn't stop with just one form. They seek out more potent products. That's the sense of the reference to mixed wine. So what's the best way to avoid drug abuse or alcoholism? Verse 31, do not look on the wine when it's red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. So the answer is given in a pretty straightforward manner there. Don't gaze into the glass, stare at the bottle of pills, or obsess over the image of other addictive substances. The temptation begins with a glance that gives way to a longer look and then another. At the beginning of the journey, the addictive substance seems to offer just what one needs. It may calm frayed nerves, give a good night's rest, or relieve a stressed mind. But verse 32 sums up the truth of the matter. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. The end result's not what was promised at the beginning. Instead of being a supportive crutch, helping one through tough times, they're as venomous as a snake. The bite brings on pain and misery rather than the promised pleasure and relief. Proverbs warns us about alcohol abuse, and we need to heed that warning today. I read this week that the consequences of drug and alcohol abuse in the United States averages out to a cost of approximately $800 per person per year, per citizen per year. That's a staggering cost. I also read that back in 1997, statistics revealed that someone in the U.S. was injured in an alcohol-related accident every 30 seconds. So the costs are huge, and the pain and the misery are staggering. So we need to heed the warning. Verses 33 through 35 continue with a picture of the problem here. Your eyes will see strange things. Your mind, or literally your heart, will utter perverse things. And you'll be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a mast. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I will seek another drink, or literally, I will seek it yet again. Hosea 4, verse 11 says, harlotry, wine, and new wine enslave the heart. Your eyes will see strange things, Solomon says. Your heart, or your mind, will utter perverse things. The combination of dull senses mixed with bravado makes the drunk feel invincible, when he's actually going down like a boxer who's taken too many blows. The braggart claims he's not hurt, but in reality he's addicted to this form of self-abuse. Someone has clobbered him, but when he regains consciousness, he says he wasn't hurt. They mauled him, but he didn't feel it. As soon as he's completely awake, he plans to go back to the bar for another drink. The Expositor's Bible commentary here says, the sage, Solomon, gives us a vivid picture of one who drinks too much. He raves on, picks quarrels and fights, poisons his system with alcohol, gets bloodshot eyes, loses control, is confused, is unable to speak clearly, imagines things, and is insensitive to pain. While alcoholism is a medical problem, it's also a moral problem because it involves choices and brings danger to other people. So it's a very serious problem. This is kind of a downer lesson. It's because it's a serious subject, and it's a thing. Addiction is something that probably touches every family in some way or another. So I really wanted to kind of end on a little more positive note. And last week I mentioned chapter 16, verse 31, a gray head is a crown of glory, and it's found in the way of righteousness. And I said I really liked that verse, and I really didn't have time to deal with it. And so we're going to take the time today to kind of deal with that. And it goes along with the verses that we skipped over here in chapter 23, starting in verse 22. Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she's old. Buy truth and do not sell it. Get wisdom and instruction and understanding. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who sires a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her rejoice who gave birth to you. I came across this commentary from Max Lucado's Encouraging Word Bible on this chapter. And this is what he said. Solomon exhorted his hearers to avoid gluttony and drunkenness. He also advised them to respect older people. Younger people can gain wisdom by learning from those who are older. Don't you hate it when someone reminds you? The barber, getting a little thin on top there, Joe. The stylist, next time you come in, Sue, we'll do something about those gray hairs, those gray streaks. The invitation, you're invited to your 30th high school meeting. 30th's nothing. I got 50 here not too long ago. Your doctor, nothing to worry about, Bill. Your condition's common for folks in their mid-age. The dawning of old age, the first pages of the final chapter. A golden speck appears on the green leaves of your life, and you are brought back to wrinkled face with the fact that you're getting older. You're brought face to wrinkled face with the fact that you're getting older. Everything hurts when you wake up. What doesn't hurt doesn't work. Your parents begin acting like your children. The smile lines don't go away when you stop smiling. And then boom, the rain becomes a torrent. The gentle tap becomes thunder, cardiac arrest, empty nest, 40 candles or more. Bifocals, boom, boom, boom. There is no denial. Ponce de Leon did not find the fountain of youth, and neither will you. Oh, but how we try. Barbells get pumped, black hair gone gray goes black again, or better yet, blonde. The van is traded in on a truck, a four-wheel drive monster that will tackle the treacherous ravines of the interstate. The face gets stretched, the chin gets tucked, and you get the idea. But try as we might, the calendar pages still turn, the clocks still tick, the body still grows older, and with every new pill we take, we're reminded that growing old is a pill that has to be swallowed. But the real pain's deeper. For some, it's the hollowness of success. Life at the top of the ladder can be lonely. Mahogany desks grow cold. Sales awards tarnish. Diplomas fade. Sometimes a dream come true world has come true, and it's less than you'd hoped. It can get even worse. Regret can lead to rebellion, rebellion against the demands, rebellion against the mundane, rebellion against the ho-hum, rebellion against whatever ties you down, your job, your government, your station wagon, or worse still, your family. Let me be very clear with my point. Growing old can be dangerous. The trail is treacherous and the pitfalls are many. One is wise to be prepared. You know it's coming. It's not like God kept the process a secret. It's not like you're blazing a trail as you grow older. It's not as if no one has ever done it before. Look around you. You have ample opportunity to prepare and ample case studies to consider. If growing old catches you by surprise, don't blame God. He gave you plenty of warning. He also gave you plenty of advice. So are you feeling uplifted yet here? Well, just hang on. Read Jesus' admonition. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Luke 9:24. Your last chapters can be your best. Your final song can be your greatest. It could be that all of your life has prepared you for a grand exit. God's oldest have always been among His choices. When I read that, I got to thinking about the gray-headed folks in my life that have been significant, played such an important role in bringing me to this point. I think of my paternal grandmother, who was gray-headed for as long as I can remember, as long as I knew her. Her dignity, her busy hands, her soft voice, and the respect that was shown her by all who knew her, all been a strong example for me. I think of my mom and dad, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, all the things that they taught me. I think of all the ways they encouraged me and supported me along life's way. I think of all the older generation here at Southwest Park who've inspired, mentored, encouraged, and taught me about life and what's truly important. I'll always remember Brother J.A. Morgan and how, when he prayed, it seemed like the portals of heaven opened and we were ushered into the very presence of God. I could mention a bunch of others, but as I read this last part of what Max Lucado had to say, I thought about Marge Fowler and Norma McKelvey. And so I have a story about those two, but before I tell the story, listen to the last part of what Max Lucado says. As we get older, our vision should improve. Not our vision of earth, but our vision of heaven. Those who have spent their life looking for heaven gain a skip in their step as the city comes into view. When Ruth and I came here 46 years ago, in a few weeks, Marge Fowler and Norma McKelvey were here. They were active parts of Southwest Park. Marge was the director of the Sunday school department that we joined. Norma, of course, taught in the children's part here forever. Marge had cancer, and she was in the hospital. This has been many years ago. Of course, both Marge and Norma have gone home to be with the Lord. And this was near the end of Marge's life, and so I got off work one afternoon, and she was in the hospital, and so I went by the hospital to visit her. And when I got there, Norma was there, sitting by her bed, and they were visiting. So I went in, and I just stood kind of at the foot of the bed and listened to their conversation. In those few minutes, I got a graduate level seminar on how one should age gracefully. As they talked about their lives, there was no hint of self-pity. No complaints about life being unfair. Both had battled cancer and health issues, but their conversation was focused on the good things in their life and the blessings that they had enjoyed. When I left there, I was really encouraged and uplifted. I'll always remember that, because I had went to try to be an encouragement, but I wound up being the one that got encouraged. Do you listen to the wisdom of the elderly? Take time this week to talk with an older person and gain wisdom from that individual. I hope that uplifts a little bit.